This thing is absolutely off the hook. It's insane. 3 oscillators with 5 different types of synthesis engines, a noise generator, and it can also load samples which can be mapped to the keyboard. It's got 5 envelopes, 3 filters with multiple routing options, 5 really powerful LFOs, and a big FX section.
In terms of inspiration for Obsidian, the synth, I kind of made it up as I went along.
Stick with me and I'll show you how great Obsidian really is. Hello and welcome to haQ attaQ. My name is Jakob, I'm your host and you're watching a haQ attaQ episode. Right here we've got one of the most interesting synthesizers released during 2018. Its name is Obsidian and it's a part of NanoStudio 2. Now this is something that a lot of users have been waiting for a very long time. The first version of NanoStudio came out about 7 or 8 years ago. And in the case of NanoStudio 2, well, the wait has been more like 5 or 6 years, so it's been a very long time.
My name's Matt. I'm the developer of NanoStudio 2, which is my second app on iOS, the first one being NanoStudio 1. All of my time, my hobby stuff, what creative output, building weird electronic stuff has really gone out the window and it's all gone into this app. It didn't start that way, but as time went on, I was looking at how long this app was taking. And really, I thought, I'm just going to have to go flat out on this app, really, and put everything into it.
Yes. NS2 has been made with a lot of love, passion, careful planning, and attention to detail. Details. There's just one more thing I need to clarify before we move on, and a lot of you viewers might already know about this, so a little patience please. I just need to explain it because I have been getting a lot of new subscribers this year, and a lot of you might be beginners. So I just want to clarify that Obsidian is not a stand-alone synthesizer. This is not something that you can purchase by itself and then load up into, let's say, AUM, Audio Bus, Beatmaker 3 or Cubase. No, it's not an audio unit extension either, otherwise known as AU3 or AUV3. You basically have to purchase the whole NS2 DAW in order to get access to Obsidian right here. Now with that cleared up, I want to show you the inside of Obsidian and why I think it's so great. Now the first thing we're going to have a look at is the left-hand side menu bar that we can find right here. Now here's where you navigate through Obsidian, and the first page is called Perform, and that's the view we're inside right now. On the Perform page we can find a pitch wheel, and we can also find 8 macro controls that can be mapped to anything inside the synthesizer that you want to control. The process can be a bit fiddly and you kind of have to jump through menus here, but it's also very straightforward at the same time. Oh, and the touchpad right here can also be mapped.
So I really wanted to try and make it all in one, so you had all the features available from one place. That does come with its own challenges, which is to keep it not too intimidating and relatively easy to use. I tried to solve that as much as possible because I know there are a lot of users who are not interested in editing synth patches. They just want to find it by its properties. So you have a page where you can search for patches based upon their attributes fairly easily. And then the page above that is a simple macro controller style page where for all the factory presets and the IAP ones, they're already set up. So you can really use the synth if you're not interested in editing patches from that top page.
my viewers already know what a macro controller is, but if you're completely new to this kind of stuff, then a macro controller is something you use to control something else with that might be off screen, so that you won't have to do any menu diving or page switching while performing. I'll show you how to map stuff in a little while, but first let's go through the rest of the menu items here. The next page is called Patch, and here is where you can find your presets or patches. Let's just stick with patches. In its factory state, Obsidian comes with 300 patches, and you can find some really interesting sounds in here. Now, if we look inside this window here, we can see that we have 3 options. One called User, and this is where all of your patches that you save will end up. Next we have Factory, and after that we have IAP, which stands for In-App Purchases. Yes, it's possible to buy more patch packs for Obsidian, and when you do, they will show up in here. The next menu item in the left-hand side bar is the actual editing page. Here's where we tweak our own patches. And this is the most interesting page, and I'm dying to get into this, but we have a little bit more to go through here. So let's have a look at the FX/modulation page. When we enter here, it's split up into 2 sides. And on the left-hand side, we have the modulation matrix. It shows up as a list where you have 24 modulation slots that you can use to modulate everything inside the synthesizer. On the right-hand side, we can find the FX page. And there's a lot of options in here, and we're gonna get through that. But first, we're gonna jump back to the Perform page, and I'm gonna show you how you can map the macro knobs here to stuff inside the synth.
In terms of inspiration for Obsidian, the synth, I kind of made it up as I went along. I knew I wanted multiple synthesis styles, and I really chose the methods that were quite cheap on CPU but gave you a lot in return. And again, with the filters on it, I wanted a range of lots of different types of filters and interesting ways of modulating them really, and connecting those modulations together. I didn't really go extreme with analog modeling stuff. I don't really consider that my real skill area particularly, but also you can get very expensive on CPU quickly if you're really going to town on analog modeling and nice filters. And for Obsidian, I didn't really feel that was its purpose exactly. It's meant to be the workhorse synth used by the app. And if it went using 50% of the CPU on one sound, monophonic, then that's not really its job.
Right, so we're gonna do some macro mappings, and this segment is gonna be a bit deep and lengthy, so stick with me. Now, there's one thing you should always be looking for inside NS2, especially when programming Obsidian, and it's this button up here in the upper corner. You can find this in the other views too, and this one will actually give you more options when programming the synth. So let's say you want to program your macros and you want to add some functions to them. You want to be able to control maybe their filter cutoff with knob 1 here. Well, just simply press this menu item, and as soon as you've done that, you can see that we get these colored options showing up over the knobs and also over the touchpad. Now, these colors will change according to the channel color. So if the channel color is orange, all of these options will be in orange. If the channel is in purple, then all of these options will be in purple. I think it's a nice little added feature, and it also makes it easy for you to know which instance of Obsidian you're in if you're using several of them inside NS2. Now, to map something, you simply just tap the knob you want to map, and so I'm going to tap knob 1 right here. Now here we get another menu. On the left hand side here, you will be able to see all of the knobs, and to the right we have more options. We have the option to initialize the knob, meaning setting it to a neutral state. We can also swap controls between knobs, and we can also rename our knobs to whatever name we want, making it easy to navigate the performance view while performing. And that's a really nice detail added here by Matt. Now the interesting option is the edit dest, or edit destination as it means. Now the labeling of that button will change depending on whether that control already has something mapped to it or not. So if it doesn't have anything mapped to it, like right now, then it will say add destination because there's nothing there. But if there's already something mapped to it, then that button will say edit destination. You see, in order for you to map something to the performance knob or the macro knob of your choice, you have to press add. And pressing this will put Obsidian in a learn mode, kind of like a MIDI learn mode. So all you have to do is to navigate to the edit page and tell Obsidian which ones of the functions inside the synthesizer you want to map to that macro control. So if you want to map the cutoff in the filter to that knob, to that macro control, then you simply tap on the plus sign showing up over the cutoff knob right here. Tapping it will add it to the list. Now notice that I said list, yes, because if you're wondering is it possible to add more than just one control to this macro control? Like, can you map more stuff? Let's say I want to add the resonance knob to the macro too and control both the cutoff and the resonance at the same time. Then the answer to that question is yes, yes you can. So in order to see the mappings you've already got mapped to a macro control, plus also add more controls to that macro control, you have to enter the edit mode once again. So next we just check the list to make sure that we've got the right knob selected, and then we proceed by pressing edit destination. And here we have the list. Now one thing that can be a bit confusing is the fact that the macro mappings you make will show up in the modulation matrix. And this is because it's basically the same system. You're using a source to modulate a destination. So right now we can see that the cutoff is mapped and we want to add another control. And to do that, simply press add, and once again Obsidian is put to a learning state and waiting for input by us. So next we need to move over to the edit page where we can find all of the controls for the synth, navigate to the filter, and I said we were gonna map the resonance knob. Well, it's called Q inside Obsidian. Q stands for quality, and the Q control is the resonance knob. And so all we need to do now is to press that. But before we do that, take a look at the cutoff knob. Instead of a plus sign, we get a minus sign. And this allows you to actually remove the cutoff knob from the macro. You can of course remove a control from the macro itself from within the macro list, but I just wanted you to know about this function. But we're gonna map the Q control, and so we press the plus sign. And there, it's mapped. Now, you might be wondering how many controls can you actually map to a macro? And the answer to that is, all in all, you have 24 modulation slots that you can use inside Obsidian. And that includes both the macro with the touchpad and the modulation matrix. So this can be a bit frustrating when you've been sitting and working on a patch, because you might have filled up your modulation matrix with a bunch of modulations. And then when you go over to the perform page to actually map some macros, well, you've run out of space. And what you actually have to do is to remove a bunch of modulation destinations inside the modulation matrix in order for you to free up some slots so that you can map some stuff to the macro controls. So you have to keep that in mind at all times. Now, there is one thing with this that isn't a downer, because this will allow you to do some really interesting stuff. Because not only can you map the items inside the edit menu for the synthesizer and the tweakings you do to the actual sounds, no, you can also map the FX section and all of the effects inside here. And if you free up all the modulation slots, well, that means you have 24 slots over to map to just one knob if you want to do that. Just think about it. Imagine having 24 different controls mapped to just one of these knobs. The insane types of presets you can make with it, and the way you can change sound over time, and the way that you can build patches that can drastically change in sound and function depending on what you decide to map here, well, that's just amazing. Now, there's one more basic feature that Matt put into Obsidian that I want to show right here. It's something that makes your life easier when making patches inside this synth. Let's open up the menu here and let's scroll down here to, let's say, all macros. Now, when you press this, it actually gives you the ability to initialize all of the macros, or you can copy the macros, meaning you can paste them into another instance of Obsidian, and so you won't have to do the same thing all over again. You can also save your mappings to their own preset, and then you can load it. So when you've got a really nice mapping you've done that you want to keep on bringing up, instead of having to save an entire preset, you could just save the mappings. You're gonna lose your minds. This saving feature, initializing feature, copying feature is included inside the oscillator page, the FX page, the modulation matrix page, the filter page, the LFO page, the envelope page. Oh, I said this was insane. I said this thing is insane. This thing is insane.
Obviously, the synth is quite complicated as synths go. It's got a lot of features in there. And I was really determined to try and make the main edit page a single page if possible. That's difficult because it has so many features. So I tried to get there as much as possible, but at some point I have to tuck the next level of features behind something. And in this case, it's the button on the corner, or some people call it a hamburger button. It's the one with 3 lines there. And this seems like a natural place for lots of extended features like that. I think part of it was a suggestion from one of my beta testers who was trying to make some patches for the synth. And he said, I'd really like to just copy some oscillator patches over to another one. Is it possible to do that? I wasn't sure if anyone would actually use it. I had a feeling some power users might be interested in it. I had a feeling that a lot of users wouldn't care less, but because it's tucked away behind that button in the corner, it doesn't interfere with the natural use of the synth.
You can save presets for each and everything. If there's something you keep on doing a lot when you're building patches, you can just save a preset of it. If it's just for the envelopes, then save a preset of it, reload it when you're making a new patch. Or maybe you're working with a patch already, a factory patch, but you want your own envelope settings or your own LFO settings or your own oscillator settings in there, then you're just loading one of the oscillator presets or one of the envelope presets or one of the FX presets. You can hear me losing my mind here because this is great. It's a synth nerd's best friend. See what I mean with Matt Borstell, aka Blip Interactive, the creator of NS2, putting a lot of love, passion, and attention to details in this thing. Okay, so macro controls are basically controls we interact with, and that's a form of modulation that you perform manually. But what about more autonomous types of modulation? Like, let's say you want to set up an LFO to control a wobbling bass, making the filter cutoff open up and close quickly to a beat. Now, when you want to set up something like that, you have to go to the modulation matrix. And here it's different from what you do in the macro controls, because in the modulation matrix, you have to tell the matrix what source you want to use and where to send it. With the macro controls, you're basically entering the source already, the source being the knob you're trying to map stuff to, and then you just choose the destination. Now, the modulation section inside Obsidian is so incredibly deep, I won't be able to show you its true potential. I won't be able to show you a fraction of its potential because it's got so much you can do with it. There is one thing, though, I could mention, for instance, like the fact that you could modulate the speed of the LFOs with themselves. So if you wanted to modulate the speed or control the speed of LFO1 with LFO1, you could do that. I'm just repeating myself, aren't I? Okay, so what I'm trying to say is the options are plenty. There's a plethora of them. So if we open up a slot and we go to a source, then there's like six sources. Then you have none, so you can reset it. But if you open up one of these, like the key one, you have something called constant, random. So it's gonna, every time you press a key, it's gonna choose a random key. So there's like random values. That's very interesting. There's some really interesting stuff in here. Let's just go and check the destinations. Now here's where it gets insanely interesting, like the amp envelope. Here we've got something called breakpoint. Not only can we do the regular stuff like the attack and the decay, we also have decay 2, release level, retriggering. We have a multiplier here where we can use another control to control the modulation that we're doing. It's so deep and I don't really know how to properly show you everything, so I'm gonna have to make more videos in the future. But the modulation matrix alone, if you're a synth nerd like me and you want to do some creative patches or some creative modulation stuff, then Obsidian is without a doubt a synth for you. Now, as you saw earlier, you can press the minus sign on a control that is already mapped to a modulation destination or a macro. But there is another way of deleting a control. You can just tap on the item inside the modulation matrix and then press this icon up here, and that will remove the control. Now I really want to dive into the synth engine's sound generating capabilities, but since we're already in the modulation and FX page, I could just show you something really neat with the effects page first. So we have a multi-effects where we can switch between choruses, ensembles effects, and flanger and phaser effects. We also have a delay effect, and we also have a reverb effect. Now, the cool thing here is that you can actually change the order of the effects, the way that the audio passes through the effects. And you do that by tapping and holding on one of the effect boxes and moving it back or forth. And doing something like this can drastically change your sound. Very neat feature. And finally, we get to the edit page, where we can find the sound generating capabilities of Obsidian. The thing that makes this, well, it's actually some of its parts, but I just love this page so much.
Okay, for the analog oscillator, I really wanted it to replicate those standard oscillator types that everyone's used to with analog synthesis. So I needed to cover the main waveforms. Now, those are actually generated using a wavetable synthesizer. So they're pre-processed up front, so they don't contain too much aliasing. And unlike the wavetable oscillator, which is another option, the wavetables are much more detailed. So it really reduces the aliasing to a very low level on those, which I considered that to be the point of that oscillator.
Right, so we have 3 oscillators at our disposal, and each of them can have its own type of synthesis engine. And we're gonna get into that, but we're just gonna have a look at the switcher menu up here. Here you can switch between the different oscillators, where you can see number 1, number 2, number 3, and you also have options for setting the velocity for the 3 oscillators independently, making it very, very interesting for players out there playing Obsidian. You also have the voicing option, where you can switch from mono to polyphony mode, and you have up to 16 voices. You of course also have a unison mode here, which doubles up the voices up to ×4. It's got a detune knob and also a stereo spread knob. Next, we can see the menu opener, the 3 little lines here, which I've highlighted several times throughout this video. But just to reiterate, here you can copy the settings from one oscillator to another, swap oscillator settings from one oscillator to another, copy, save, make presets. Yeah, this is so good. Have you seen anyone make any such feature, for all these things inside a synth on iOS? I mean, it's not like it's a new invention, but it's a really, really nice way to make preset making more interesting inside a synth, and Matt should really be praised for doing it like this. And I hope that other app music developers out there follows this example. So if we go back to the oscillator view here and look at the actual engines, right now we've got an analog synthesis engine loaded inside oscillator 1, and it can be switched out. And to do that, you just press on type and you'll get a list. And here you can choose between an analog synth engine that we've already got loaded. You've also got a wavetable synth engine with some really nice wavetables in there. Next, you have a PD that stands for phase distortion, and personally I like phase distortion synthesis because it's got a very, very yummy sound to it. Next, you have a 3-operator FM synthesis engine. As you can see, there's a lot of good stuff in here, but it doesn't end there because continuing on, you have a Super Saw engine. And it's not called Super Saw, it's actually called NanoSaw inside Obsidian. And, you know, of course, if you're making the synth, then you get to name its features. And so those are 5 synthesis engines, but on top of that you also have a noise generator with several types of noise. So you can go from white to pink, brown, low pass, high pass, band pass, and also notched. Lastly, we have an engine that makes this thing really special. Yes, a sample player. It's actually not just a sample player. No, because not only can you load samples in here, you can record samples directly into this thing. Yeah. And if you look down here, you have something called auto map. That's right, you can actually map the sample you've loaded or recorded into the sample player inside Obsidian. And I want you to think about this. You could set each and every one of the oscillators to a sample player mode and then use the envelopes, the filters, and the LFOs to make some interesting stuff. You can mix samples together with synthesis to make some really interesting sounding drum sounds. And for good drum sounds, you need good envelopes. And guess what? Obsidian has that. So we're gonna have a look at the envelopes next. Yes, jumping to the envelope page, we have 5 different envelopes to choose from. And you can enter this list by either tapping the downwards pointing arrow or the name in caps. Pressing either of these will open up the list. But if you press the grayed out names, the actual destinations routed to the envelope, then you open up the modulation slot for the envelopes. You can also get here by pressing the menu and then pressing Edit Destination.
Yes, there are a few different types of envelope. I really was thinking of the main uses you need. For synths, most of the time you want fairly standard ADSR because you know it's very familiar. And also the adjustable curves I think are quite useful as well. Most of the time you go for a standard exponential decay, but sometimes you want a more linear slope. Then there's a simple AD envelope, which is just good for those percussive sounds, the ones where you don't really care about how long you hold down the key for, you just want it to do the same thing every time, which is great for drum synthesis. And then there's a bipolar version as well there, which is really mainly intended for pitch-based stuff. Because otherwise the only alternative is to use a single pole envelope, which can only go in one direction. And then you can choose which direction you want it to go in based upon using the modulation connection settings. So you can set it to go negative or positive. But I just felt sometimes it would be useful to choose a starting point, which is maybe lower than the natural pitch and then go up again or down, without having to fiddle around with modulation connections.
Man, this is so good. It really gives you all the tools you need to tailor your envelopes to your precise liking. Thank you, Matt. Moving to the opposite side in the upper right corner, we have the filter section. And here we have 2 filters, and these 2 will pass through a global filter. So there's actually 3. Now this section is really powerful because not only does all of these filters have various modes, there's so many modes. I'll show you this in a bit, but first, there's actually a routing function in here, and it's really powerful because it's got 3 modes for the filters, the way they run. So if we tap up here, we open up that function, and here we can switch between parallel, serial, and stereo. Not only that, Oscillator 1 can actually bypass the 2 filters and go directly to the amplifier. And it can also bypass even the amplifier and go directly to the global filter. These routing options gives you powerful control over your sound. So let's have a look at the filter modes. I mean, you can see already why I love this synthesizer so much. Now, we choose one of the filters. I'm gonna choose filter number 1 here, and we go to type. So we're gonna open up type, and here we get a list. So we have our low pass filter, the band pass filter, the high pass filter, a notch filter, an equalizer, a formant filter, a comb filter, and a WS filter. It's kind of a distortion module because when we open this one up, we have something called variant. And when we open that up, we have a tube, a soft, hard, enhance, sine, and lo-fi. And all of these will somehow warm up or distort, destroy, enhance the sound. And all of the filters are like this. They all have variants of different types of modes within each filter. Can you see how much I love this? How many times have I said that? And we're not quite done yet because we have one more box to check, and it's the LFO box. All of the LFOs have 10 different waveform modes that you can use to modulate stuff. There's some really interesting stuff in here like FM sync. Yep, you've got an FM sync mode for the LFO waveform.
That just seemed quite obvious to do, really. I'd already done the FM oscillator, like the audio frequency oscillator, and I was looking at more wave shapes for the LFO and ways in which I could modify them. I was right on the edge of doing a true programmable step LFO, but then I thought, you know, sometimes programming those, you start losing track of what you were doing, really. I was making a sound, and now I've ended up programming steps in an LFO, and I've got really deep on that. And I thought, FM is a really good way with just 2 knobs of just moving them and doing weird shapes.
So is the camera on? Oh, the camera is on. Right, that's why I'm talking to. Imagine we're controlling a knob. It doesn't matter what the function of that knob is. It doesn't matter what rate we've got on the LFO. What matters is that you understand the basic principle of it. Now, when you control a knob with a sine wave, it basically makes the knob move smoothly up and down like this, according to the wave. So when it's moving down the wave, it will go down. When it's going up the wave, it will go up. There is, of course, a way of, flipping that around so that, never mind. But that's what it does. That's a nice way of modulating things. But what happens when you want some more unconventional ways of doing it? Well, with many other synthesizers, you're pretty much locked into either triangular waveforms or square waveforms, which is pretty much an on and off kind of function, because it holds a signal and then drops and holds that signal and then goes up and holds the signal. But imagine this. Here's the FM sync LFO. Look at this waveform. Imagine the movement of the knob now. So it will go down, hit that wall, and quickly, rapidly just jump up again, move into a parabola shape, and then down again, and then up to a small peak and down, but not all the way down, and just up again, and then hold for a while, going down. That is I keep using the word interesting. How many times have I said interesting in this video now? The movement of the knob is it's very interesting, isn't it? It's very interesting. And on top of that, you can even make stepped wave shapes because you've got a quantize knob in there, making it into a more digital kind of shape. And now suddenly it will behave more like a square waveform, only it will keep the shape but in bits. The LFO waveform speeds can of course be synced. They also have some output modes that you can switch between: bipolar, uni-half, uni-full. And that pretty much concludes the rundown of Obsidian inside NanoStudio 2.
So I had a few guys from the NanoStudio 1 days who were quite enthusiastic users, and they said, we'd like to be involved in a beta test if you're doing it. I don't know if they realized that would be going on for 5 years or not. I always tried to do my best with each release I gave to them and made sure it was free of bugs and had my best ideas of it. And I was saying to them, right, this is the best I've managed to get so far, so here you go. And then sometimes they would come back with some ideas, and I would try and incorporate those if possible. It's not always possible to incorporate every idea because sometimes the ideas are the easy bit. It's trying to fit them into the user interface and avoid it becoming a mess. That's the difficult bit. So there's a guy called Marek. He's always super enthusiastic and full of ideas. There's another guy, his username is Stixy, and he's like the voice of reason. He's like the dad of the family. He's kind of more like, yeah, it's all right, but it could do with this as well, or that could be better. There's another guy called Lee. He's somewhere in the middle. He's more of a user, I think. There's another guy called Syrup Core, and he's a programmer, and he's quite reasonable and considered as well. So I normally kind of put ideas out there, and I see what the reactions are, and then try and find this average middle ground between them, because they've all got good opinions and good ideas, but they all come from different directions. And I know that they're almost like a little microcosm of user reactions.
Obsidian is one of the best synths, in my opinion, to have come out in 2018. And this is also the reason why I do not release any top lists too early in the year. I actually try to wait until the year is over, because I know from experience that there's always those straggler apps coming out really late in the year, like November and even December. If I would have done my lists too early, I would have missed out on Brambos's Noir, and I would have missed out on NanoStudio 2 and Obsidian right here. So I've been waiting patiently, and you do lose some views of that because people are crazy over these lists. But I'm just more concerned with making a list where I actually get to choose out of all of the apps that came out during a year that I had time to use, of course. So if you want to support my channel, the first way of doing it is really pressing that thumbs up, because it really helps the channel growing, and it helps my content getting out there, because YouTube is being told by you, all of you, pressing that thumbs up, that my content is good, relevant, and good. I already said that. You can also share my videos, that's really helpful too. And if you want to support me in a personal, more financial way, then my Patreon is the best way to go. don't like Patreon, then you have PayPal. If you don't want to do PayPal, then you can always check out my tracks on Bandcamp, and soon I will also release my full 10-track mellow album on a lot of different streaming medias like Spotify and iTunes Music, stuff like that. So that's also a way of supporting me. Follow me on social medias. You'll find all of the links to everything down there in the description. Always open up the description and you'll find lots of information and links to social media stuff and my Discord and everything like that. Thank you so much for watching. All comments and ratings are very much appreciated. As usual, I wish you a very productive week. Now go finger all of your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.